Okay, Wednesday, March 9th. So we're seeing a lot of NATO hesitation about handing over the planes because it's basically tied up in court. Do they want it to be officially the Americans who hand them over, or the Polish that hand them over, or NATO that hands them over? It's all in typical American style, tied up with lawyers and bickering and arguing, all this political wrangling while people are getting slaughtered here. They're bombing out whole apartment blocks. So it's very disappointing. I really thought we were going to get those new planes in here, and we were going to have some air cover, better air cover than we had before. I really hope that they can get that solved, because no matter how the planes get to Ukraine, the Russians will know it's a NATO thing, an American thing, whether they fly off from Poland or fly off from Germany. It's the most stupid thing I've ever heard, and it's really showing the incompetence of the Western politicians. So anyway, I instead of just talking about news headlines, which you all can read, I decided this video is a little bit more original. I have 3 of my own ideas about how Ukraine can continue to fight this war. So idea number 1 is hire the Taliban in Afghanistan as mercenaries to fight for Ukraine. Now, as you know, the U.S., when they pulled out of Afghanistan last year, they left them the best weapons and training money can buy. I mean, the Taliban have Stingers, they have Black Hawk helicopters, they have night vision, they have the best body armor. There's a Taliban unit called Badri 313, which basically, I think many of them were Afghan special forces that we trained. We trained them in U.S. Special Forces School, U.S. Army Rangers School, and now they've switched sides, and now they've become part of this Taliban Delta Force. And you can see some videos on YouTube, Badri 313, but they're very well equipped, very professional. They're not these guys running around in pajamas with RPGs. This is like a badass fighting unit. And yes, they're the enemy, but there's a lot of times you make deals with your enemies because you have a bigger enemy. So we could bring the Taliban units to counter the Syrians and the Chechens that are here in Ukraine, that are being brought to Ukraine by Russia. And in exchange for success, they would get some land grants out in eastern Ukraine and they could build a new life. Now everyone says, oh yeah, now you're going to have radical Muslims on European soil. Well, I don't think so. I spent some time in Turkey. I think it would resemble more of that, they would moderate over time. Once they're far away from Afghanistan and they mix it up with the local Ukrainians and everything, I think they would moderate, and eastern Ukraine could resemble something more like Turkey, which is not a bad place. I was in Turkey twice last year. It was my first time going to a predominantly Islamic country. And it was amazing, actually. They had shopping malls, they had nightclubs. The girls were dressing like Western girls, mini skirts and all of this. It wasn't burqas and AK-47s. It was actually quite the opposite. It was actually I enjoyed being in Turkey more than I ever enjoyed being in Florida or California. The food was good, the people were nice. The hotels, the quality of the hotels for the money was just out of the roof, just over the top. It was way better than anything I'd been in the U.S. So don't believe all this white nationalist bullshit, and believe all this right-wing bullshit, about that. You can bring Muslim people into a society and they will moderate. There are different types. There's radical Christians or radical Muslims. So I think it wouldn't be a bad idea. And to add on to that idea, Ukraine could settle Islamic refugees into Ukraine and then ask European Union for $10,000 per year per person, to support it. That would be cheaper than Europe having to bring in the refugees. And they could build entire villages, and all that money, all those building contracts would go to Ukrainians. So there would be a building bonanza in Ukraine, and a small business bonanza that would benefit Ukrainians. So especially in eastern Ukraine, where the economy is totally depleted. So it would be like an economic renaissance. There would be some mixing, some multiculturalism. And you'd have something like America. What's so bad about that? Multicultural society where people work together and get along. And yeah, of course, there would be some radical elements and whatever, and some crime, but that's everywhere. I live in Norway. My doctor there is a Syrian refugee, and he's a pretty normal guy. He's not radical. He does not have an AK-47, and I met a lot of nice people who are refugees, but the right-wing media tends to just focus on the few people who get in trouble. But most people I found in Norway actually integrate themselves. They get jobs, they buy an apartment, they take their kids to the daycare, they go shopping, so this might not be a bad strategy for Ukraine going forward to try to become a multicultural society, because that's something definitely Russia does not want. They can't control that. They can't control people who are more loyal to their religion than to their state. So if you have some people with religious conviction, whether they're Christian, Muslim, or Jewish, and you get them living in your country, that's a form of defense, and I think any radical person would moderate if they were granted land after fighting for Ukraine. I think they would have a new life and new things to look forward to. I think people get radical when they have nothing to look forward to. But yeah, that's crazy idea number one. Let's make a deal with the Taliban for defense. They have the best American equipment, best American training. They have the Blackhawks. They defeated the USSR in the 1980s, and they defeated America recently. Well, I wouldn't say defeated, but they pushed out. So, yeah, that's idea number one. Idea number two is really, really nuts. That would be Ukraine just go and attack Poland, invade Poland, and then Poland would have to defend itself. They would have to do their own defense. So, that then Poland would invade, do a counter, or NATO would do a counter invasion, and then the counter invasion they would, take all of Ukraine. Ukraine can just say, okay, we surrender the whole country, and then by default, Ukraine would now be in NATO, or Poland would annex Ukraine as reparations for the invasion. They could send 5 Ukrainian soldiers over the border, and they take over the border station with paintball guns or something. And then Poland does this big count. Of course, this would all be choreographed. And then Poland does the counter invasion, with the NATO support, and annexes the whole of Ukraine. And then Ukraine just is now one giant Poland. And then we can get the no-fly zone up, and get the Patriot missiles right into Kiev and everything, into Kharkiv. So yeah, that's a crazy idea too. Is that Poland just Ukraine invades Poland. Yeah, Ukraine invades Poland, and then NATO would do the counter invasion and annex Ukraine, and then that by default would get the Russians out. And idea number 3, this is more of an engineering idea. I've read a lot about aeronautics and blimps and things like this, but the big thing lacking in Ukraine is high flyer air defense, high altitude air defense. That's really the weakness. That's why all these bombers and cruise missiles and everything are getting through. So, plus also the shelling, but that's going to be taken care of by more drones. Europe just needs to send more drones, and they can take care of the artillery. But they could mount air-to-air missiles onto blimps, and then just let them float high up, and then have the radar down on the ground, because the missiles are guided by radar, and that could be a quicker response for high flyers, for high altitude planes. But also with the blimps, you can they're cheap. Relatively speaking, cheaper than aircraft. For every one blimp up there, you could have like 10 decoys. So, if the Russians are trying to shoot them down, they would expend a lot of ammo. To hide the real blimps, you could have decoys, and they could just have cardboard tubes, that look like missiles on them, and, the Russians would attack those ones. So you could do a strategy like that. I don't know. I don't think it's so far-fetched. To have just some blimps loitering with air-to-air missiles on them, and they can be guided right to the planes by radar on the ground, and those radar units then won't be responsible for having the missile battery, and they could be more mobile. they can switch locations, every so often, and they'd be hard to find. So, and they have different type of radars too that can flicker on and off so the missiles can't get a lock on them. But that could be something that could be developed in Kiev Polytechnic Institute or in any other engineering school using existing technologies, just integrating what's already out there. It doesn't require much new development. But we need, since now it's obvious Ukraine is on its own and not get any help from NATO, they need to start doing their own engineering, and they need to come up with some low-cost solutions. Some other type of Molotov cocktails, as one would say, for solving different problems. So, yeah, that's all I got. Those are my 3 radical ideas. Number 1 is, work with the Taliban. They benefited from all the American training, got all the American weapons, everything that Ukraine is begging for, that Afghanistan already has. Number 2 is Ukraine invade Poland, and then the counter invasion and counter annexure will put Ukraine into NATO. And then idea number 3 is blimps with air-to-air missiles. So maybe you like or don't like these ideas. I'd like to hear from you. Let's at least open the discussion. We got to think outside the box, like really outside the box. We got to think off the table, not even the box, but yeah, off the table the box is sitting on. So anyway, you all have a nice day, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.